The Krillian elders stood in a semicircle at the valley's edge, their silver fur rippling in the brutal wind. Behind them, the settlement huddled against the mountainside, its bioluminescent domes flickering weakly in the approaching storm. They had already begun the morning chants low, keening sounds that spoke of cubs lost to the ice, of bloodlines ending in frozen silence. Captain Mira Hale stepped forward, her thermal suit's indicators already flashing warnings about the temperature drop. -63 degrees Celsius and falling. The frozen valley stretched before her like a wound in the world, its depths obscured by swirling snow that could strip flesh from bone. "You cannot," Elder Veseska said, her translator implant rendering the clicks and growls into standard. "No one survives the frozen valley when the storm winds rise. Not even your kind, human." Mira's breath formed crystals in the air. 17 cubs. "You said 17 went in after the glider crashed?" "They were following the migration path," another elder explained, his voice heavy with grief. "The weather shifted too quickly. By the time we realized they hadn't turned back." He trailed off, mandibles clicking in distress. "How long?" Mira asked. 19 hours. 19 hours in those temperatures. Even with the Krillians' natural cold resistance, the cubs would be approaching their biological limits. Mira checked her suit's power cells, the heating elements, the emergency beacon. She had maybe 36 hours of operational time before her equipment failed. After that, she'd have about 15 minutes before hypothermia took her. "Captain Hale?" Vesiska stepped closer, her 6 legs moving with surprising grace. "Your diplomatic mission here is complete. Your ship leaves in 3 days. There is no obligation for you to—" "There's 17 cubs down there," Mira interrupted, her voice flat. "That's all the obligation I need." She didn't wait for a response. The Krillians had taught her much during her 6-month stay. Their history, their customs, the way they wove songs into their daily speech, but they had never quite understood what humans called stubbornness, or perhaps they called it stupidity. The line was often thin. The valley swallowed her in minutes. The wind hit like a physical force, threatening to knock her sideways. Ice particles sandblasted her visor, forcing her to rely on thermal imaging and ground-penetrating radar. The glider's wreckage appeared on her scanner 3 kilometers in a twisted skeleton of biometal jutting from a snowdrift. No cubs there. They'd moved on, seeking shelter. Mira's training kicked in. She was a scout, trained for hostile environments across 70 star systems. The frozen valley was just another battlefield, and the enemy was time itself. She read the terrain, identified potential shelter sites, cross-referenced them with Krillian behavioral patterns she'd observed. Cubs would seek enclosed spaces, somewhere out of the wind. The valley had caves, she'd seen them on the geological surveys. Her fingers were already going numb despite the heating elements. She cranked them higher, knowing she was burning through power reserves faster than planned. Behind her, her footprints disappeared almost instantly, erased by the relentless snow. 4 hours in, she found the first sign: a piece of fabric from a cub's thermal wrap, caught on an ice formation. The trail led her deeper into the valley's throat, where the walls rose like the ribs of some frozen leviathan. Her suit's warning lights blazed a constellation of red and amber. The cave entrance was almost invisible, a dark slit in the ice barely wider than her shoulders. Mira squeezed through, her suit scraping against frozen stone. Her headlamp cut through absolute darkness, and there, huddled together in a mass of silver and white fur, were the cubs. 17 pairs of eyes reflected her light, wide with fear and fading hope. "Hey there," Mira said softly, switching to the Krillian language, her translator helping smooth her pronunciation. "I'm Captain Mira Hale. I'm here to take you home." The largest cub, barely adolescent, separated from the group. His fur was matted with ice, his movements slow. "You're the human diplomat," he said, recognition dawning. "Elder Rintal. I remember you from the feast ceremony." "That's right, Rintal. And I remember you asked me about Earth's oceans." Mira knelt down, bringing herself to his level. "Ready for a walk?" "We cannot make it," Rintal said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his limbs. 3 have already stopped moving. We tried to keep them warm, but No one's stopping here. Mira cut him off. She was already pulling out the emergency thermal blankets, the chemical heat packs, distributing them among the cubs. She gave Rintal 2 extra. The ones who can't walk, we carry. I need you to help me organize them. Can you do that? Something shifted in the young Krillian's eyes. He straightened, his natural leadership instincts responding to someone who saw him not as a lost cub but as a partner. Yes, Captain. The return journey was a nightmare painted in white and black. Mira carried 2 of the smallest cubs in a makeshift sling, while Rintal coordinated the others, keeping them moving, keeping them together. When one stumbled, the others helped. When Mira's legs threatened to give out, Rintal's voice urged her forward. The storm reached its peak 6 hours into their return. Visibility dropped to 0. Mira's suit was running on emergency reserves, the heating elements cycling on and off to conserve power. Her exposed skin, just her lips and the tip of her nose, had gone beyond pain into a numb absence that terrified her. But she kept moving. When her navigation system failed, she navigated by dead reckoning and instinct. When 3 more cubs collapsed, she and Rintal fashioned a sledge from her emergency supplies and dragged them. Her muscles screamed. Her lungs burned with each breath of supercooled air that her suit could no longer fully warm. And still, she moved forward. The lights of the settlement appeared through the storm like a vision of heaven. Mira's legs finally gave out 50 meters from the edge, and she fell face first into the snow. But Rintal was there, pressing against her side, lending what little warmth his young body could provide, calling out in his people's voice. The elders came running. They carried the cubs to safety first, then returned for Mira. She was barely conscious when they brought her into the medical dome, her body temperature dangerously low, frostbite claiming her fingers and toes. The medical staff, both Krillian and the human medic from her ship, worked frantically. But through the haze of pain and exhaustion, Mira smiled. Because every cub was accounted for. Every single one. 3 days later, when Mira's ship prepared to depart, she stood at the airlock, her hands wrapped in regeneration bandages, her face still bearing the marks of frostbite that would take weeks to fully heal. The Krillian Council had gathered to see her off. Elder Vesiska approached. Her movements formal, ritualistic. In her manipulator limbs, she carried a crystal carved from ice taken from the frozen valley itself, preserved through technology to never melt. It glowed with an inner light, etched with symbols Mira was only beginning to understand. In our history, Veska said, her voice carrying across the landing pad, we have seen many species. We have allied with some, warred with others, traded with most. But we have never seen one walk into death itself, for children not their own. With no promise of reward, no expectation of glory, she placed the crystal in Mira's bandaged hands. You asked us once what we thought made humans special. We said we did not know. Now we do. She leaned closer, her mandibles clicking in the pattern that meant deep respect. Humans are the ones who come back. No matter the cost, no matter the odds. You come back, and you bring everyone home. Rintal stepped forward from the crowd of cubs, all 17, healthy and recovered, their silver fur gleaming. Captain Hale, he said, his young voice strong. When I am grown, when I lead my people, I will tell them this story. I will tell them about the human who smiled with a face frozen by ice, because she knew we were all alive. Mira knelt down, bringing herself eye level with the young Krillian one last time. Her smile was still painful, the regenerating tissue sensitive, but it was genuine. You helped save them too, Rintal. Remember that. You didn't give up. That's what leaders do. As her ship lifted off, Mira watched the settlement grow smaller through the viewport. She would carry scars from the frozen valley for the rest of her life. Her fingers would always ache in the cold. The nightmares would come, on quiet nights, of endless ice and fading lights. But she would also carry the memory of 17 cubs, alive and whole, and the knowledge that when it mattered most, she had not turned back. In the galaxy's vast archives, the incident would be recorded as a minor footnote, a human diplomat who exceeded her mandate to perform a local rescue. But among the Krillians, the story grew into legend. The human who walked into winter, the captain who smiled through frost, And in the council chambers of Earth, when ambassadors asked why humanity insisted on dangerous, direct involvement in crises across their allied worlds, the answer was simple: because someone has to go into the frozen valleys, someone has to come back with everyone, and humans had never learned how to leave anyone behind.